Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. All right, Steve, thanks for that. That's a song by Steve Cleveland called Feeding the Cats. So, welcome to the show, everybody. Wanted to let you know about a few Lynn Street Din shows coming up. We got second Sundays at Alberta, and then Steve and I do jazz concerts at Bethel Lutheran Church on February 25th, at Mount Carmel Church, March 3rd. Both of those starting at 4 o'clock, going for an hour. So come check those out. And then our guest today is Polly Buckingham, who is a fiction writer and poet, and a longtime friend of Steve Cleveland. So I'm going to pass it over to Steve to take it away.
All right. Yeah, we're very happy to have Polly on the show. She's an award-winning writer. She's got a book of poetry out from Lost Horse Press from 2020 called The River People. A book of short stories, The Expense of a View, won the Catherine Ann Porter Prize. And that's out from University of North Texas Press, 2016. Year of Silence won the Jan Colby Memorial Chapbook Award, and that's out from Florida Review Press. That was from 2015. She's got a book of stories coming out called The Stolen Child and Other Stories, forthcoming from Betty Books. She's published in her work in many quality, well-known literary magazines such as the Gettysburg Review, Threepenny Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, the Poetry Review, North American Review. She also is a publisher herself. She created the magazine Stringtown and Stringtown Press about 30 years ago, I believe, when she was living in Astoria, Oregon. She's also editor of Willow Springs Magazine. And with that, how are you doing, Polly?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Monday morning, you know.
Right.
Wanted to get started asking you just about what are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty big question because, and it might unravel the whole interview. I don't know, but
Okay.
I've got kind of two projects going at once, which is unusual. I usually have one thing on the back burner that I'm kind of rewriting and then working mainly on another thing. But I teach at Eastern, and they gave me a grant to. I got to choose any sort of writing project I wanted to, and I pitched a fiction project. And by the time I got the grant and I was supposed to be working on it, I didn't really I wanted to write poetry. And I had been writing poetry that winter, and this is going to come around, I promise you. And the poetry I was writing was about a surgery I'd had like 3 years before. And it was the winter of 2022. And I was just having this great run of poetry writing. It was part of a manuscript called The Old Woman and the Bell. So that's one of the two projects that I'm working on. And then I got diagnosed with cancer. And so that kind of interrupted everything. So there were occasional poems coming out now and then. And over the summer, I was supposed to be working on this fiction project, which, I didn't do the amount that I had hoped that I would get done on that project. In fact, I did almost nothing because I was having surgeries. And I came out of all of that stuff. And then last summer, I finally started working on the fiction project. And here's the interesting thing is, well, I'll get there in a minute. I came out to the fiction project, and I was in the back in my little cabin in the back of my house, working on this collection of stories that are linked stories. I think they're probably a novel in stories. And I was writing about a man starting a fire behind my house because I live out in the Scablands and there's a lot of property back there. And the collection is about a development that goes up on that property. And there is a development threatened to go up back there. And so I had sort of imagined what would happen if the development went up. And I had imagined these stories told by the people who were living in that development. And I imagined a fire. And so I was working on that story. I'd gotten to the end of the handwritten draft and I was on the first day of typing up the new draft. And I stepped out into my garden and there was a fire. And I evacuated, and that was the Medical Lake fire. So I didn't go back to that project for a while. I went back to the poems. But what was interesting to me about the poems was that I was writing about surgery, finally able to write about this surgery I'd had in 2018, and got interrupted by more surgery. So I sort of feel like the two projects I'm working on have been more prescient than anything I've worked on before, and closer to the bone. And I wow. Kind of, we're like, currently I'm working on the poetry, and it's mostly about post-fire stuff. And I think over the summer I'll go back to the fiction collection when I can stomach it, honestly.
Yeah. Speaking of prescient, I've known you for a long time, and I've seen more than one instance where a story you write or possibly a dream you have then is reflected in, in waking life. Is that am I right about that? Or?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's something that, my sort of worldview is that everybody has that, right? I mean, if really scientifically even all time is happening at once, why wouldn't we have that? Why wouldn't we know? And so, but we're so used to this kind of linear model that we only catch glimpses of all the possibilities all at once, right? I mean, and you're seeing more art that reflects this. And if you just think of that film, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and there's a great Matthew Baker story in a book called Why Visit America that's called, this story blew me away. It's called Read This Story Backwards. And it's a story in which time is moving backwards, and it takes you a while to figure it out, but it's normal for everybody that birth is actually death. So, you start when it opens with somebody who has just had a suicide being born, and it moves backwards toward his, the last 10 years of his life.
What was the name of that piece again?
It's Matthew Baker, and it's called Read This Story Backwards. It's the last story in a collection called Why Visit America. It's stunning. It's one of the best stories I've read in years and years.
There was kind of a coffee table book when I was growing up that was called Einstein's Dreams, that had, I guess that Einstein would supposedly kind of have these visions, they'd fall on his back and just start having visions and dreams of time and space that would come to him. And this book was sort of like a fictional, rethinking of what he might have been dreaming about. And one of the stories in there that really struck me was a place where time moved slightly slower as you moved further from the center of the earth. So all the wealthiest people would like build their houses and stuff at the very top of mountains where, the air was thinner and food was harder to get to, but they believed because it became this status symbol to build your house higher and higher because of that extra 7 minutes on your life that you got from being, that far away from the center of the earth. And I like that idea of a social interpretations of slight changes in how we perceive time.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. Is that book black?
Yeah, it's like a little coffee table book. There was another one in there where time was sticky, And so like you would walk through town and you would just see people like stuck in various repeating patterns in their life, like a moment where they broke up with somebody and never got over it. You would just see them like in that breakup constantly as you walk down the street, or somebody who lost somebody was just in that moment of like frozen in that moment. Yeah, it was an interesting
Cool.
book.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, Paul, you're to me, your writing, your poetry especially, it's very nonlinear, and there's a lot of dream imagery. There's a lot of mystery. Do you see yourself writing in any sort of tradition, such as deep image school or any of that kind of thing? Are there writers, Neruda or people like that have influenced that sort of approach?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
subject?
And yeah, and you hit it. I mean, deep image is my first love, that poetry, and because
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I'm doing. And Neruda is a favorite of mine. I've really fallen in love with Lorca recently, and I mean I'd read him before, but I sort of went back and reread in a big fat anthology of all of Lorca, all of his poetry recently. And I love I love Robert Bly. I love everything that he has written about the concept of the deep image, and it's really it strikes me as just really another version of surrealism. Um, but I think
Yeah.
it has a more emotional, um,
Mm-hmm.
and probably ecological, like land-based
Mm-hmm.
kind of feel to it.
Do you think? I almost think James Wright was, well, he was, I think, a
Yeah,
deep image guy
absolutely.
too,
Yeah,
American poet and friend of Robert
yeah,
Bly.
yeah.
Um,
Right. I love the Spanish surrealists. I love Transtromer, Tomas Transtromer.
Transformer, yeah, and who Robert Bly translated and was good friends with.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Bly was an interesting character.
Yeah.
For sure.
Did you ever meet him?
I did.
I've heard him read. I never, and it's funny
You did?
because, yeah, I heard him read it. He came to Eastern, and it's funny because Eastern Washington University Press published a little special collection of his, and one of my mentors knew him. So it's surprising that I didn't meet him when he was here, but I did get to hear him. And
I love that little book. That's a beautiful little book. What is the name of that one?
The Something by Moonlight. I want to say it's The Whale by Moonlight, but I know it isn't.
I'm curious. How did you meet Robert Bly?
How did I meet Robert Bly?
Yeah.
I went to one of those men's conferences that Robert Bly was presiding over with some other folks, including James Hillman. The one I went to, James Hillman, psychologist, writer, and Michael Mead. They were kind of the guys that were running these for a while. And anyway, so I went to one of those. It was a week-long camp out with all kinds of classes and lectures and dancing and the whole thing. And so I met Robert Bly there, and he's a character, that's for sure.
Is that something that he did regularly, or did he put that on, or was he just like hired to?
Oh no, he came up with it. He and I think Michael Mead was early on too,
And
and then
the three of them. Yeah.
and then they pulled James Hillman into it, which was great. So that's where I met James Hillman too, and got to talk to him a little bit. And he's, one of the, I mean, Polly, I know you're a big you're a fan of especially The Dream in the Underworld, that James Hillman book, which again goes back to dreams, and
Right. What I love about that, and it's funny because I was just teaching some of this stuff. What I love about The Dream in the Underworld is this notion that the day world is actually controlled by the night and not the other way around. So it's not like the night is, according to Hillman, according to this book, right? It's not like the night life, the dream life is processing the daylight. It's the day life. It's like the night life. The dream world is giving you things to look at that can materialize in waking light. You wouldn't have thought of it if you didn't dream it, if you hadn't seen it. And so you sort of bring that up from the underworld, and that's a mythic notion, right?
Yes.
Orpheus bringing stuff up from the underworld.
Sure. Yeah, that book turned my head around for sure.
Yeah.
And the idea, and Hillman always said, in analysis or whatever, so often people will try to interpret dreams and, well, what does that mean? Well, what does that mean? And he said, you're kind of killing the dream in that way because you're placing your own, rather than that, follow the dream. And he said, stick to the image. That was his, and then see what the associations are. And to me, that's a poet's approach too, because
Exactly.
you write a poem with all these wonderful images, and then if you're going to, just say it's all, you're going to kill it if you say it means this precisely and it means this. It's like, well, then why did you write the poem? Just tell people, and so I like that in your work. You stick to the image, and the images retain their mystery, I would say. And I'm going to break into song here. Not literally, but I wanted to read The River People, if that's all right with you, Polly. I'm going to read one of your poems. The river people float asleep in their basements. Birth happens every night. Their grass homes never burn, but shine. Killings do not change the dreaming and floating. Impervious, they clap their green hands. Hey, diddle, diddle, the rat stole the fiddle, and the party marches on. Comets turn to stars, and stars to comets, and counting always goes wrong. The river people wear their green hats like crowns. The river is grim, and still the river people hang their green jackets to dry. Turn them inside out and turn them outside in. The river people are the shine in a dead man's eye. And that's the closing poem of your book, The River People. And so I read that because of what we're talking about. Underworld, underwater, dreams, There's a lot of water in your work too, whether it's fiction or poetry. Do you want to talk about any of what I just went on about?
Well, I mean, especially when that was written, I really think well, there's a strain in my poetry that's more realistic, and there's a strain that's more fantastical and more deep imagey. And I think more recently I've probably taken the deep image and placed it in a more not linear, but a more everyday framework.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not that. That was written. I mean, water is emotion, and that was written after I'd lost my sister. It was the first sister I lost, and she was the closest person to me, and she died when she was 42. And I was in my 30s. And this was a series of poems I was writing every day when I could finally kind of come up from the level of grief where you can't do anything, right? And then you kind of come up from that, and I was able to express myself. And so this was kind of at the end of that period of writing all these poems about, I mean, it's not like it's about her death, but it is about her death. And I was having a lot of dreams about, I apologize, that's a landline, I can't stop it. I was having a lot of dreams about basements filled with water and murky water, and and so I think it's not surprising that water shows up a lot, because that is the emotional body, and grief resides there. And so I think, does that sort of address what you're...
Yes. Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of grief in your work, whether it's fiction or poetry. Speaking of Robert Bly, he emphasized grief and basically, talked a lot about how certain cultures, like perhaps the American culture, is in denial a lot of the time, and so keeps grief out And Robert Blythe thought that grief was a very important part of writing, and he gravitated towards those poets who were able to grieve. And I find that in your work and in your fiction also, there's a lot of sadness and despair and characters that really are trying to get it together. Sometimes, looks like they will. Sometimes looks like they won't. It reminds me, your work. I reread Festival in your The Expensive of You in that book, and I just love that story. And it's seems pretty naturalistic to me. It's not like a dream type of story, although there is, well, anyway, there is a part of it like that. But I think it reminds me of Chekhov, just your compassion for the characters who are really, desperate, and just your compassion really comes through.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. That phone. I'm not that important. Nobody should be that insistent.
I was thinking the same thing. It's like, I wish my phone would ring like
Hold the
that.
fuck up. Excuse me. Oh, it's not radio.
No, we're good.
Yeah, thank you. No, I definitely am an emotional core, and grief is a huge part of what I'm doing. And I like what you said about what Bly says about grief. And I think Hillman, I've been using Hillman to teach Ovid, to teach mythology, because I think in so many classes, students learn that, and I'm teaching writers, I'm not teaching standard lit students, but I think in so many classes, students get told that mythology is like, oh, this is why the grass is green, and this helps us figure out what to do with our crops. And I just think that's kind of BS. It's just so simplistic, right?
It's
and
reductive, yeah.
It's really reductive. And I think, and Hillman talks about it, contemporarily, what we've done with mythology is we've pathologized the myths. And that his supposition is that he says something like the myths are alive and well on the corner of 40, or the gods are alive and well on the corner of 42nd Street. And so, when Ovid uses, in the Palace of Sleep, for instance, he uses the character of Sleep, of Morpheus, in it, or he'll use, I don't know, Narcissus. And it's actually a living, breathing thing rather than a pathology. And I think that strikes closer to what grief feels like, for instance, and what I think it's more organic in terms of how we exist. And so to create characters and create worlds that are informed by that, not like, oh, I'm going to bring in this old mythic thing because I'm learned and I know about this story. It's not that at all. It's just we're in conversation with the stories that have been around a really long time, and they organically show up over and over again. And I don't know, it's called the mythopoetic movement for a reason.
So are you sort of talking about the difference between myth and fairy tale? Like, I mean, I think of like Grimm's fairy tales as being a simplification of myth to create a kind of a moral lesson or a quick lesson, basically, right, for children. That's right. I mean, it's, the Grimm fairy tales. They kind of boiled down these old myths that maybe had more. That were maybe less clear in their sort of moral lesson, and then that I think I kind of think of myth. When I think of myth, that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind to me is fairy tale, I guess, something that has been created to make it like a clear moral lesson versus like I think you were talking about earlier, following the or sticking with the image. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
basically, like, don't go out into the woods because, you know, a witch will eat you. You know what I mean? Versus being caught up with like, I don't know. Am I off here? I'm trying to understand you guys.
No. I have a somewhat different point of view in that I think sometimes fairy tales and myths are simply moral lessons or instructive, but a lot of them, I think fairy tales are connected to myths and often come from myths. But I think unpacking a fairy tale, there's usually a lot of kind of archetypal stuff going on that reaches back to, maybe polytheism and mythology. There's a lot of psychological stuff going on that's under the surface. A lot of complexity, actually. At least that's what I see. And so I think it could go either way, but
Yeah. And with psychology, when you go in to see a counselor because you're depressed and you get a diagnosis of depression, it's a list of symptoms, right? But if you look at that mythologically, it's a whole complex of characters and stories, and
sure.
that is so much truer to our experience than this reductive list of symptoms. And so that was kind of Hillman's point about mythology, and that it's a shame that we've done that.
And Carl Jung had that statement: "The gods have become symptoms." I think that he was the one who said that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the idea. So that if you look into a symptom, and this is sort of the deep depth psychology viewpoint, if you look into a symptom, you're going to find a god there, probably a god that you haven't been paying enough attention to, or you could say another part of yourself. But as Carl Jung found, like in his patients, people would dream this stuff, and it's like, well, this is coming straight out of this certain myth.
Exactly.
And it's like, this person knows nothing about this myth, and so he saw that over and over, and that's why he came up with the idea of, the collective unconscious.
Right.
Yeah, the only James Hillman that I've read was that we've had 100 years of psychology and the world's getting worse.
Yeah, written with Michael Ventura. Yeah.
Yeah, where it was basically just a couple of very intelligent people, like seemingly like drinking whiskey and talking a lot of shit. But that was something
Really
that I thought was kind of brilliant that they talked about, was that if you're having a psychological crisis, look around. Like there might be a good reason for it. You might be living in a society that's not allowing you to relax. And that in a lot of ways the psychology has been brought into the fold of industry to try and kind of keep people, working more efficiently than trying to get people sort of functional in society and like off you go, versus like actually being rebellious the way that it started, the way that it's like, well, if you're depressed, like start a revolution.
Yeah. No, it's supposed to be disruptive. I mean, that's the signal to us. When you wake up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep, it's supposed to be disruptive, right? You're supposed to pay attention to that. You're not supposed to take a pill and go back to sleep.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a term that Hillman uses. He calls that he calls that nicks. That's the thing in the middle of the night that wakes you up that you have to listen to.
How does he spell that? What is that?
I think it's NIX, but I'm not sure.
NIX.
In a lecture rather than.
I wonder if it's related to like Nixie, which maybe is like a forest spirit or something, or I could just be making this up. Yeah, he talks about the nightmare. He talks about how the most disturbing dreams are the ones that you really want to look at because it's really trying to tell you something.
Yeah.
And often, some of the greatest poems, I think, have those disturbing images. I think of Yeats' The Second Coming. What rough beast its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. It's with the head of a lion, and it's like, all this horrible imagery, and the ceremony of innocence is drowned, and the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and, but what a great poem. It's a fantastic poem.
Well, I learned something when we were before we went live that you two have never had you play piano while Polly read something.
It's really strange, but no, we haven't.
Is that something you all would be interested in trying?
I'd give it a go.
Sure.
Great.
Steve, I got one. You've seen it, but it's been a long, long time. Well, not a long time. It's about 2 years old. And it's, I can give a little intro because I talked about this at the beginning. This was right at the end of when I was, well, anyway. Now I'm thinking twice. Okay, I'm going to try this. This is a little deep image. This is pretty deep imagey. It's called Ringneck Dove in 3 parts. And I'll let you start, and then yeah. Ringneck Dove in 3 parts. A ringneck dove coos in the quietest part of an afternoon. It is a sound a well might make, or a single note of a silver cello. Repeat. You idle in bed listening to birds so deeply you adopt their rhymes, rhythms, and follow them into a silver glade. A dove rises from the grasses, crescent moon in her beak, and shakes frost from her wings. The old woman in her bark mask rings the bell with hands made of branches. Every morning she rings the bell, perched atop the basalt hill. But you do not see her today. Until today, you do not hear the bell. The bell is the laughter of crows, the conversation of finches, the hollow call of the ringneck dove. The bell is the roar of the lion inside you. That was cool.
That was cool.
That was cool.
I love stuff like that. What a great poem.
All right, Polly. Well, I don't know if I told you we usually try to cap things off about a half an hour, but thanks, Polly Buckingham, for joining us today. I don't know if there's anything else you two want to discuss.
I'm fine going a little more, but
Right on.
but we don't have to.
Yeah? What do you got in mind?
I wanted to ask you a little bit about Stringtown, because you started that magazine, like I think about 30 years ago, and the press, and you publish other writers in there, lots of writers in the magazine and the press, and is that kind of you're resting on that right now, or what's going on with Stringtown?
Yeah. Well, I think when we were talking in the pre-room, the conversation before the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
Russell mentioned, how do we get by as artists in the world we're in, and how do we find that time and that space to write in, and to create art in and music, um, and I think that also extends to publishing. I have a lot of questions about the publishing models we're looking at right now in the world of publishing, and I have a lot of questions um, about marketing, and this kind of business of writing that we have to do that I don't like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as a publisher, I mean, I love publishing, and I love publishing because I love saying, here are these people who do this great work, and I want to bring this great work to other readers. And also, selfishly love reading submissions. I love design. I love coming up with covers. I love looking for images. And when I started Stringtown, I was in my 20s, and I just came out once a year, and I made these little postcards, printed them out on my home daisy wheel printer, and
Mm-hmm.
brought them around, which eventually became a laser printer, and brought them around to bookstores on the Oregon coast, and looking for rural writers, looking for writers whose voices weren't necessarily heard. And then and I go with my little box and sell the magazine when it was done, and visit these independent bookstores. So it was all very, I don't know, I was trying to support independent bookstores. I was trying to support writers whose voices aren't heard. It was before I went back to grad school. I started in my 20s, and I look at the publishing model now, and this was no model, right? This was just something that I did because I wanted to. And I think in publishing, there's a need for that. And I think a lot of small publishers, that is what they're doing, but we're all kind of stuck in a trap of having to market, right? Like, which is really a different thing, because that model that I was operating out of, it doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, I did that for about 10 years. I did Stringtown for 20 years, but driving around to all these bookstores, I did for about 10 years. And it wasn't just that I could no longer afford the time to do it, but the bookstores were closing. And that was really heartbreaking. And I worked at independent bookstores at the time for about 8 years before I went back and got a graduate degree, and then was just hired right out of my degree. And then, academia has kind of done the same. Like, the teaching is great, but the school is just garbage. Like, the system is so
Mm-hmm.
backwards. And it is what Russell was saying earlier, like, hurry up and work. Like, you just are constantly, everything is set up to maximize your time and effort, and kind of take advantage of your time and effort. And so, I guess I'm more in Stringtown. I can't do it. I don't have the time. I'm the editor of Willow Springs now, and and that's out of the university, and I love it. And I try to do some subversive things with it. Like, we're going to a big conference this week, and we made these ridiculous little flyers. They're little postcards for a reading, and they remind me of the postcards that I used to make for Stringtown, except that a student did them with all of our collaboration. And we're giving them out. We're not putting the images online. We're not, they're just like, there's a limited amount of them. They're going to be these weird little conversation pieces that you can pick up, because, maybe people do want a piece of paper now and then with a provocative and
Mm-hmm.
funny image on them, or, so I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been thinking about it in terms of my own work, my own time, and in terms of publishing. Like, what are we doing? Because this isn't this kind of, I've won some of these contests, and I run some of these contests, but, like, paying for a contest so that you can get your book published that's the model, because small presses don't have the funds to run. And then so there's like the small press here, and then there's the conglomerates here that just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you're writing a novel, you have a 0.001% chance of getting a $30,000 advance. And opposite of that is, gosh, I just published a book with a poetry book with a small press, and I'm paying to go around and sell that book, and doing all the legwork myself, and there's a tiny little check attached to it. But like that discrepancy is it's really hard for me to reconcile. And then so I could see going back to Stringtown if I weren't working, but I don't even know. I'd have to not be working because that has run me into the ground.
Yeah.
So I don't even know what that would look like now, because again, the model that I had isn't the model that's out there now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
And I'm a terrible marketer. I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be a marketer at all, ever.
Me too, especially your own stuff. It's like I can play in a band and talk up the band as sort of like a part of it. You know what I mean? To say like, oh, the guitarist is amazing, the singer's amazing, like come check it out. But to actually like jump up on my own soapbox and be like, I'm amazing and you should come hear me play is really
That's a tough one.
hard.
Yeah.
It takes a certain type of personality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's not music, it ain't music and it ain't poetry, right? It's marketing as a totally different muscle.
I think so. Yeah.
I imagine these days it would probably be mostly internet based, right?
That's
if you were
right.
to do a publishing company. Yeah,
and it's like it's a lot of social media and newsletters that you get in an email and metadata, and I don't even know what some of these things mean. Like there's a new social media platform every other day. And I can't stand them, and I use them, but I can't stand them. It's like you kind of can't have it. I have a really great respect for writers like Albert Goldbarth, who never used a computer until he did an interview with Willow Springs magazine. He'd never done an interview with anybody before. He's in his 80s. And he he didn't know what the mouse was when he was doing the interview. But I like he won't use email. He's really firm about a lot of those things. He just is not going to engage, and that he gave us that opportunity feels really pretty special. But we reached out to Mary Ruffel to ask her for an interview, and when I went to her website to find out, how to reach her, she wrote, "Surprise! I don't have an email address. You'll have to contact my publisher." And I was like, "Yay! That's, I think I feel a little dirty for not doing that myself, right? And I think we have to push back a little bit more, myself included."
Yeah, I hear that. It's pretty hard to not have email and do like the work that I do and trying to connect with different people for rehearsals and different music jobs. But yeah, we all used to do it.
Yeah, when it
Landlines.
when it comes to social media, like I don't think of myself as being on social media really at all. But truth is, like I am on Facebook, I am on Instagram, I have those things. Steve uses Twitter. Like it's one of those things that kind of creeps in. You're like, oh, I'll just have the one,
Right.
But yeah, I got decent at using Facebook for marketing myself, and and for telling people about shows and stuff. And then a week later, I saw on the Daily Show they said Facebook is your crazy aunt's social media. And I was kind of like, all right, well, fine then. I give up. Like if I'm just catching up with this thing and now it's not hip anymore, like I'm done.
That's what happens as we get older. But
Moving
you'll
platforms.
find out.
And also, I mean, I've heard that, like with TikTok, for example, I mean, I know it can translate into real numbers for people, but I think there's a lot of inflation. There's a lot of like, you've got all these millions of followers, but it doesn't necessarily translate to money or people coming out to your shows. So what's the point?
Some of the best marketing we did is when there were no venues because there were lockdowns and we couldn't play music out anywhere. So we started having shows out on the front lawn in the
Well,
summer.
that felt much more organic, like people coming to Zoom. I listened to you guys. There was something, there were a lot of sites like this, but there was one site and they showed up on Facebook who was doing a concert a night of grass and folk. And every night I listened to that, and it was my lifeline. My friends, Greg and Cara Dwyn Spatz, did a song a night. And they're bluegrass musicians, and it was great. I listened to it every single day. I listened to their piece, and they put it out there.
Yeah.
So I think that felt much more organic. That's like, okay, we have a new medium, and we're still doing art, and we still want people to see it. And it did. There was no money. There was no price tag. It wasn't marketing. It was, Hey, I wonder if I could read one more poem, because you said to jump in and sing, and
Sure.
I really want to read.
Yeah, let's do a poem and then we can let you go or get out of here at some point.
Okay.
Soon, but
So this is pretty recent, and I'm not sure I've earned the last line, but I hope so. It's called, and it's about the fires, which I have been writing about this fall. It's called Dog Heaven Has Burned, and Dog Heaven is the area behind my house. Black trees with copper needles line the ponds. The sight, a fist in my throat, a bear trap in my chest. My dog leashed to keep him from the dead animals. Damp ash stings my eyes. We wander to Otter Creek, Morbid Pond, Lung Lakes, Moat Lake, Deep Pond, the lake at farthest shore, the cliffs of Gaia Nueva. All basalt scabland spots I assigned secret names, once bright with birds and sage, tangled brush and bitter root, reflective ponds, red limbs, and the scent of sarvisberry flower. Cattails and wild iris and camas, porcupine and coyote, moose with algae and waterweed dripping from their jowls. All now a thick mud ash, all blackened and stark, until I creep into beauty, an ephemeral pond now dry, a tiny bowl in a shallow hollow whose patterns of reflections have always stopped time. The shadows now are of charred trunks against a floor of copper pine needles, perfect and austere, the weave of some heaven, the impossible math of constellations. It is unchanged and changing all the time. I follow the basalt home, the faintest color in the lichen clinging to it like paint. I too am stone, and I will live forever.
Thank you, Paula. I love that poem. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I think you've earned the last line.
Right on.
Thanks, Polly.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much.
Right on. We're gonna.
That was fun.
Steve, you want playing us out with
right.
Feeding the Cats?
Feeding the cats.
And again, thanks everybody for joining another episode of Russell's Wall of Sound. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Polly.
Yeah.